So I'm going to move on to the next question. They write, my son is 11 and he has a lot of issues. Recently, my sister suggested I get him looked at for Asperger's, which I looked up and it doesn't even exist anymore. Can an 11-year-old get diagnosed with autism? I saw that Amy Schumer's husband got diagnosed. He's a chef. Maybe I don't know what autism is. What should I be looking for in an 11-year-old?
Well, there's a lot of things to unpack in this question, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that 11-year-old absolutely can be diagnosed, that is something that I want to assure, anyone. Honestly, anybody can be diagnosed if they meet the diagnostic criteria for autism. And the reality is, no, you don't need to have somebody assessed for Asperger's. Asperger's is just a kind of another form of autism that we've kind of now integrated in the new DSM-5 criteria. It's all within the autism spectrum kind of umbrella at this point. But previously, Asperger's, I think what this person would have been referring to would have been that their child kind of meets criteria for being a high-functioning individual. And so when we talk about that, when we talk about the domains that an individual that's 11 years old that hasn't yet been diagnosed, I'm sure that this child probably has a lot of prerequisite skills, probably has language, probably has a lot of these adaptive skill sets that we'd probably expect about an 11-year-old to have. But it wouldn't be surprising that if this individual does kind of meet the criteria for autism, that maybe they're demonstrating some deficits in areas like their social responsivity, their understanding of areas like emotion, some of their executive functioning process. Maybe they're just really disorganized. They could be experiencing some of the other things that kind of come along with having autism. Maybe they're depressed because they're struggling socially. So there's a lot of reasons that maybe this individual should get that diagnosis, because then people like CARD and our therapist team here and supervisors here can develop a program that would be appropriate for this individual, that would meet them where they are. We don't need to start everybody with a program that's highly intensive with regard to language, but we could actually evaluate the domains that this child is specifically struggling within, and then see what we could do in terms of a treatment plan for them.
So you mentioned a couple of different things to be looking for, that if they're struggling socially, if they're struggling with, you were saying really, really disorganized and not being able to keep things together. Because one of the things this mom was saying, like what should I be looking for? It is this whole, they call it a spectrum, because there is a spectrum of people, and people can have different symptoms. I love the saying, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? So it's kind of hard to pin down, but I always wonder why, when you get to this point where somebody else is saying, maybe you should have your child looked at for, and let's imagine that it was, that they said tonsillitis, or that they said maybe you should have your child looked at for shin splints, right? Hopefully we're all getting our kids to a pediatrician on a semi-regular basis for well checks. I just don't know what the harm is in asking, right? Because, it doesn't mean that your child's going to be labeled forever to ask. And the truth is, as you were saying, if you are at someplace like CARD, they can help your child to overcome whatever their deficits are, no matter what they classify it as. So my question is, why not get it checked out to be sure? What do you think about that?
Just on that topic, I think that absolutely get it checked out. And it is a bummer. And even, this parent brought up Amy Schumer, and Amy Schumer has kind of drawn a lot of tension recently with regard to kind of bringing up how, it's that stigma that her and her husband are trying to kind of fight against. It's too bad that there is a stigma attached to the autism diagnosis, because in this child's case in particular, they could really benefit from services like what we can provide at CARD, but any ABA services from any provider. Doesn't need to be a CARD, just that these individuals have access to treatment. And the sad part is that even an individual that is operating decent in a number of domains where maybe that they haven't needed that diagnostic evaluation or that diagnosis previously, now that they're running into some of these challenges, the only other options for support is maybe like a once a week therapy session with a CBT psychotherapist, right? And that'd be great that they meet with a psychologist once a week. But we would get to maybe meet with that individual on a more regular basis, and really apply. And not saying that they wouldn't benefit from that CBT, but man, it would be great to even collaborate with that professional, that other professional, and then apply a lot of what maybe the cognitive behavioral therapist is recommending for that individual in a setting where our therapist can go to the mall, can go to potentially the school with that individual, and really work on some of these goals in the environments in which they need to be learned. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that they brought up and you brought up Amy Schumer and her husband. Man, we are all loving on Amy Schumer right now. The things that she has been saying, I was saying last week that she and her husband could have decided to keep this very quiet, and they didn't have to come forward and say anything at all. He is a successful chef. They are happily married and have a baby on the way. They did not need to, for their sakes, to come out and say, hey, by the way, here's what you should know about us. But the fact that they did, and that she has been so positive. I was saying to you, I think she's done more for the autism community and awareness in the last 2 weeks than probably the rest of us have done in the last 2 years, which, we've all been trying to make sure that people know that autism is not something to be feared. But Amy Schumer is saying, one of the things that I realized when my husband was diagnosed was that all of the traits that qualify him for being on the autism spectrum are the reasons why I fell in love with him. Oh my goodness. If I ever meet her, I'm going to hug her.
It's a great realization of her platform. It really is. And when you have the ability to reach that many people and kind of, change some things, it's great that she's utilizing her platform for that.
Absolutely. Really wonderful. But definitely for this mom, get your child looked at. Do that without fear. Knowing that, like anything else, if they see that your child has a deficit in something, that even if it's a social deficit, there are things that can help. And I love that you recommended doing ABA, but also having a cognitive behavior therapist when kids are older. Super, super great.